Good morning. How are we all this morning? Happy Monday. How was your weekend? Any exciting stories you'd like to share with me? Anything going on with you guys? No? That's fine. So I'm very aware that Sir Keir Starmer is going to address the nation very shortly with regards to what's going on in Greenland. So I've kind of got one eye on that. See what he might say, but I'm going to go straight into the headlines this morning. I'm starting with an interesting first-person story in the Metro. So a first-person story means it's not written by a journalist, it's actually written by the person that's involved in the story. So the headline here is, I've given my landlord £33,000 in 5 years and it's worth every penny. So this is a story, not a story, this is an article from a girl who is a tenant. So this is from a tenant perspective. And it sort of goes on to explain that she has always wanted to live in the town centre of Bristol. I've got a cat here and it's super annoying. She's always wanted to live in the town centre of Bristol, and she hasn't been able to do that by buying her own home. The property prices in Bristol are basically sky high. She can't get a mortgage by any stretch of the imagination. But she says that being able to rent her 2-bedroom flat with her friend in the city centre with a garden is the best $33,000 she's ever spent. Now, I thought this was quite a nice piece because sometimes we don't hear about the private rented sector from the tenant's perspective. I'm a tenant also, and I like renting. I like the fact that from my perspective, if I need to leave, I've just got to give a month's notice or 2 months notice under the Renters' Rights Act, and I can just go, I can move, I can find somewhere else. Whereas if I owned, that would be much more of a struggle because I'd need to get this on the market and then I'd need to find somewhere else and then the legals and everything like that. It's a much slower, much more stressful process than finding somewhere and pretty much the move-in dates coinciding in the rental market. So it was nice to just read this story from a tenant's perspective. She says, I've longed to be able to meet my friends at a club or pub and be able to walk home, back to my flat in the centre of the city where many of my friends already live. She says, the old adage of renting is just throwing money away and not owning where I live has never concerned me. To me, owning was and is no different to renting. Instead, my priority was being able to live in the city centre that I love. In 2020, my dream of moving out of my parents' house became a reality. I just moved back to Bristol from a 7-month trip abroad and was fortunate to be able to resume my old job. We looked at several flats in different areas, but basically found this one in the city centre and it was perfect. It was just really nice, I think, we hear all these horror stories about, terrible tenants and all this, that and the other. There are some rogue tenants out there, just as there are rogue landlords. But this story was quite nice. And also you've got the other added aspect of, as a tenant, you don't actually have to spend money on repairs, like when the boiler breaks down and things like that. So that's something else that a lot of people don't consider. You've got these tenant activist groups that want all tenants to be able to own a property or live in social housing. They're your only two options as far as they're concerned. But are they really considering how much money it costs to maintain a property? What if you've got an EPC that isn't up to standard? You've now got to do that work as the property owner to bring that property up to scale. Whereas when you rent as the tenant, you don't have to do that. That's the property owner's responsibility. So I just thought that was quite a nice little piece from a happy tenant. And the reason why she's renting rather than not even considering buying. So yeah, so that was in the Metro this morning. So moving over to LettingAgentToday, and this is rental sector still dominated by small scale investors. So this is a bit of a contrast piece, really. So a Property Mark analyst of the latest English private landlord survey has offered a snapshot of what the private rented sector really looks like. 45% of landlords own just one rental property, while a further 38 own 2, 3 or 4. Only 17% own 5 or more properties, although these account for approximately half of all tenancies. Probably because they're HMOs, I would think. The article goes on to say, the existing buy-to-let investor is ageing too. Well, that's very true. The median age for an individual landlord is 59, although I wouldn't say that's old, with almost 2/3 age 55 or over. I think that's right, and I think that's because landlords have been landlords for a very long time. You know, there's a lot of landlords out there that have been landlords for 20, 30 years, and they've been doing it like this, and that's what they're doing. But I am also seeing a lot of younger investors coming into the market, and I spoke about this before. There's more people that would be normally expected to be first-time buyers, so moving out of mum and dad's into their own first owner-occupier. They're actually going and opting for a buy-to-let mortgage. So they're using property as an investment rather than for their own means, which I think is a complete change of mentality, isn't it? You know, I've certainly come from a generation where, you know, as an Englishman's home is his castle, you kind of hadn't made it until you owned your own property. Whereas I think now the mentality much more is like the article we just read in the Metro. It's more about convenience and being where you want to be rather than actually owning that bricks and mortar. The article goes on to say that there's a lot of reasons why landlords will be exiting the market. Obviously, they're looking at exiting anyway because of age. It would have been a retirement plan. The new Renters' Rights Act coming in, making tax digital, the changes to EPCs, all of those things are things that will be almost like a perfect storm for landlords, moving them along to exit the market. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be more properties available for first-time buyers, because ultimately, until the lenders change their criteria, then people still can't get on the property ladder. So where I am at the moment, we pay just under $1,500 a month for rental. Now, if I could get a mortgage and was paying that every month, can you imagine how big my house would be? But lenders don't look at rental history. I know there are a few now that are looking at it, and as tenants we can sign up to things like Credit Ladder and have our rent payments accrued to our credit history. But ultimately, it doesn't seem to matter what your payment history was on rentals if you aren't meeting the lender criteria for other things. So credit history is a big thing. But of course, when my rental payments aren't up against my credit history, it doesn't matter really what I do with my credit, it's still going to be below the average because the biggest chunk of my outgoings isn't being listed against my credit history. So I don't think it's going to suddenly mean that there's all these first-time buyer properties available. You're still going to need huge deposits, still going to need to meet the criteria of the lenders. I don't really see how suddenly landlords exiting is going to make all of these properties available for people to live in. Be nice if it did, but I don't think that's going to be the way forward. So next story is in Property Reporter. Landlord exodus pushes rental growth to 3% as supply crisis deepens. So this was a purposeful follow-on from the previous article. So this is actually from a RICS survey. So new landlord instructions recorded a net balance of minus 39% in December, according to the latest RICS UK residential market survey. Tenant demand also fell, registering less than 27.2 minus, but the mismatch between supply and demand means that rents are forecast to grow by over 3% over the next 12 months. The lettings crisis comes as the broader housing market shows tentative signs of recovery, with forward-thinking segmenting turning sharply towards dispute suburb currently activity. I mean, it is in contrast, I think. I think there is a slow in demand. I'm certainly seeing rental properties stay on the market a lot longer than they would have done. And I think that's because tenants are nervous. Tenants are nervous of the Renters' Rights Act coming through because they're worried, are landlords suddenly going to serve Section 21 right at the 11th hour on the 30th of April? Is that going to be a struggle? Is finding another property under the new regime going to be harder? Yes, I think it is, because tenants can't pay rent in advance. So anyone with a bit of a checkered history, which would normally give the landlord a security of paying rent up front, won't be able to do that. I think it's a big problem. So the survey goes on to say buyer demand and agreed sales remained negative in December, with new buyer inquiries at -24% and agreed sales at -19%. Both measures improved slightly on the previous month, however, suggesting the downturn may be losing momentum. The shift came in future expectations. Near-term sales expectations have strengthened and the 12-month overlook has edged into more positive territory. Sales expectations over the next 3 months is to rise by 22%, the strongest reading since October 2024. But again, you know, if people can't buy, it doesn't make any difference, does it? Goes on to say about supply. Supply conditions stabilised after months of decline. New vendor instructions flattened to a net balance of 0 in December, though low appraisal activity suggests any meaningful increase in stock will take time to materialise. House prices continue to edge down nationally with a net balance of -14%, but the trend is moderating. Regional divergence remains stark. London, obviously its own little property bubble is London, recorded a -42%, with the southeast -32%, while Scotland and Ireland continued to show growth. Short-term price expectations improved in near flat levels, looking ahead for the next 12 months. But we shall see. The Renters' Rights Act, as we looked at one of the articles we reviewed on Friday, we think that the Renters' Rights Act is going to give us false positive sales figures. So we will see. We will see. Now, these last two stories are conjoined. They're both in Property Investor Today, and one bounces off the other, which is why I've decided to use both of the stories. What have I done now? Goodness me. Oh, I don't know. Sometimes I worry about myself. Right. There we go. Where are we? I've managed to lose the story. Oh dear. That's fine. I'll start with the first one while I'm looking for the second one. What was it in Property Investor Today? Oh, I thought I was so clever this morning, all organised, and then poof. There we go, build to rent. So the first story is about 6th build to rent scheme in Spain by Aviva investors. Sorry, Missy just wants to join. I think she's missing out on her media today. Sorry. Okay. So Aviva Investors has grown its Spanish build to rent portfolio by acquiring a residential development site in Valencia. The project will be managed by Porquia, a partnership between Aviva Investors and Layatana Living, a Spanish residential developer. The scheme will deliver 120 1- and 2-bed units over 11 stories. They're going to be quite big then. The building will target a BREEAM Excellence rating and EPC rating of a AA. Wow. There will be gym, co-working spaces, resident swimming pool and children's play area. When can I move in? It is the 6th investment by Aviva in the Spanish build-to-rent market since following previous builds in Madrid, Barcelona, Palma and Mallorca. The portfolio over 1,100 apartments with a gross development value of just over 350 million. I think there's going to be a lot of investment in the build-to-rent market, and I think Spain doing what they're doing. I mean, Spain are very much against Airbnb. They've a lot of the cities in Spain have actually got bans on Airbnb. They're fining people, everything like that. So, you know, it's one of those things. And then just to follow on from that, the last story of today is Spanish property experts club together to launch new podcast. So this is 2 experts on Spanish property have come together to launch the Spanish Property Podcast. Sean Woolley from Cloud9 Spain and Mark Sucklin from Spanish Property Insight have joined forces to share information and insight into the Spanish property market, one of the most popular locations for Brits buying overseas. The Inside Track podcast will see Wooly providing his on-the-ground experience of what he's seeing in the Costa del Sol and how buyers are responding, while Suckling will be contributing statistics, market data and up-to-date information. Now, I used to have a property business in France. I had a holiday let business over there for a number of years. So I'm always interested in what's happening in the European markets, because I think sometimes what happens in Europe tends to come across to us, the same as what happens in Scotland tends to come down to us. So I'm always interested to see what's going to be going on over there. So I am certainly going to be tuning in to see what these two guys have to say about the Spanish market and whether it's worth actually investing over there now. So if you've got any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. That's the news for today. There wasn't a lot that had happened over the weekend. So yeah, any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Let me see, I think I saw a few pop up. Hi, can you tell me what a license agreement is instead of an SLT? What's an SLT? If I knew what an SLT was, I could tell you the difference between that and a license agreement. Do you mean AST? A license agreement and an AST are very different. So a tenancy agreement and AST gives the tenant exclusive possession. It's their main and principal home. A license agreement gives somebody very minimal rights. They're basically just there with permission, and that permission can be taken away at any point. In the this current day and age, it's very difficult to be able to issue somebody a license correctly without inadvertently it being a tenancy. So they're a lot harder to give. Normally it's charities, temporary accommodation, refugees, places like that would be able to give licenses. You can give a license if you're a landlord, but you'd have to be providing services. And I don't just mean throw a cleaner in there once a week and a gardener once a month. I mean proper sort of hotel services. You'd need to be providing things like room cleans, food, linen changes, those sort of things. You've asked that question about 7 times now, so I've explained the license, and I don't know what an SLT is. I'm just assuming that you mean AST. How much are they, and how can I look into buying one in Valencia? I don't know. The article didn't give me any of that information. You'd need to have a look maybe on the Aviva site and have a look at the bills. I don't know. I'm just reading the news article, I'm afraid. Okay, if there's no more questions. Oh, I have one from Donna. It moved. Section 8, and that there is still improvement notices outstanding on the property we rent. Thank you. I don't know what you mean, Donna. Sorry. Section 8 isn't affected by improvement notices. Only Section 21 is affected by improvement notices. I don't know whether that's what you mean. But you can use it as a counterclaim, but it wouldn't invalidate your Section 8 notice. Okay, thanks for listening, guys. I will be back first thing tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. for more news property headlines. Hopefully, there'll be a bit more news in the property headlines tomorrow. Thanks for listening. Have a good day. Join me this Wednesday, 21st of January from 7:30 for everything you need to know about the Renters' Rights Act. Link is in my bio.